I'm married to my wife, Christine, 9 years now. We have 3 kids, almost eight,
Wonderful.
4, and our son. So 2 girls, and then our son is he'll be a year in December. I'm never good with the months.
Okay.
Was he like 10 months at the time of this recording?
Yeah.
So long story short, with when it comes to my own kind of creative endeavors, that's a real sort of challenge for me in the last couple years of trying to recognize, okay, God's given me certain range of talents, a certain ability to, write or produce certain things, that, may not be the greatest stuff in the world, but it, matters to me. It's a
Yeah.
chance for me to participate, like Tolkien talked about that idea of sub creation. And it's such a
Hmm.
wonderful part of my life that's always been there, that creative kind of streak. Um, but I feel like it's very difficult to make the time, to do that, or to
I
justify,
hear
like,
you. Yeah.
hey, I'm going to go write for, 2 hours. Well, no, maybe I can't do that, but maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So,
Hmm.
but the big thing in terms of time, that sort of prevents me maybe from doing some of those things is probably just work. I'm blessed to be able to teach theology full
Hmm.
time, and I have mostly freshmen. So I teach, all day, get home, then do all this, wonderful family stuff every, night, of course. And so in the summers, I feel like, I'll do side projects and stuff in the summer. And sometimes I feel like just when I'm starting to kind of like get in a particularly comfortable kind of like personally motivated, routine and everything, then the school year starts, and it's like,
Yeah.
dang it,
Yeah.
I was getting somewhere with that. So
Hmm.
that's a challenge. So I think, if someone came along and, you know, if for some reason it just wasn't the right place for me to teach anymore, or I had um, an offer that I couldn't refuse to do that, I'd probably do a lot more writing, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and this is something I was talking to our friend Thomas about not too long ago too. I love doing the YouTube stuff, and I've been doing a lot of podcasting for a long time. But I'm actually right now in a period of kind of discernment about, where's the kind of like, where do I want to max that out? I love doing
Mm.
that, but could I pull back from some of the things I've been doing to focus more on writing? And so that is something that's been on my mind lately. I don't need $1 million. I think I just need better time management.
So, what would you write on? More of
Well,
the, yeah, what would you write on?
I had my one book right here, this Return of the Lord, which we can talk about a little bit. And
Yeah.
that really grew out of prayer. I get
Hmm.
into that a lot in the author's note at the beginning, where it just started as like, in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I think every chapter in that book was written, in a chapel
Wow.
somewhere,
Okay.
usually on like legal pads, like George Lucas style. Not nearly as fast as he would write, but you
Less Jar
know,
Jar.
yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Or you'll hear that sometimes, right? People like they'll say like in some documentary or something, like he would commit to what, like 5 pages a day or something. And I think some people who've never written before
Hmm.
think, well, that's not that much. I'm like, yes, it is. Like it absolutely. I'm lucky if I get 1 page done. Sometimes it's like, oh my. So that really grew out of prayer, and it was just meditations on the apostles,
Hmm.
as the title would imply, and the idea of like how did they go from being these guys who no one would have expected that kind of valor, that kind of
Right.
courage, that kind of self-sacrifice, to where they ended up. And
Hmm.
obviously, Christ is the key to that. But I just thought, you know, what if in that last moment, I'm sure the devil's tempting them the whole way. How did they get that last bit of strength?
Mm.
What anchored them for that last little bit of like, you got to, white knuckle the very end of it in faith, kind of thing. And so that kind of led into a decent amount of research, at least into the basic, kind of narratives that we have, if we have any, on the apostles' individual martyrdoms,
Hmm.
enough that I could have a framework for it. And
Okay.
then I just kind of, just sort of grew. I would see it play out in my head, and I kind of wrote it. Well, I'm the kind of guy, when I read someone else saying that it's, um, something that more like they sort of received it, and I'm no Tolkien, I never could be, but like I've seen him write on things like that. That idea of like, I didn't make this up. It was more like
Hmm.
this much more dynamic process of tapping into something. I feel like
Hmm.
that in my best moments, and so I think that's what I feel drawn to.
Yeah.
I don't. I think the project I'm kind of working on right now, that I'm getting more motivation lately to pick it up a little bit, is sort of a follow up to this.
Hmm.
Um, that's Old Testament, so Old
Oh.
Testament characters, kind of precursor type stuff. So it's a different approach. It's they're not they're not having one-on-one encounters with the Lord, right? This is like before all that. So it's
Mm.
more like, how is God planting seeds, or where are there little, largely family related,
Mhm.
familial relationship kind of seeds being planted that,
Mhm.
you as a Christian reading it might be able to be like, ah, I see where that's, where that's maybe leading. And like a little scripture quote maybe at the beginning of it, to kind of give you a little hint where it's heading, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. So,
Man,
yeah,
okay.
that's
I
fun.
have
Sorry, I'm
questions I
going
wanna
on. Let me
ask.
back
It's
up.
good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep drilling into this actually.
Please,
So, I
yeah.
wanna come back with questions on imagination, or you
Hmm.
mentioned that space of the muse interacting with you, and I actually
Yeah.
wanna come back and ask you what that means for you, but, or how you make sense of that in the world that we live
Yeah.
in and such. But before that, would you like to hold up and wave around the copy of the book and then read through the
Yeah.
blurb? Because I really wanna understand, like, this new project about the Old Testament. Just
Yeah.
I love ancient history, and so that just
Yeah.
really intrigues me. So, if it's okay, I want to drill down
Yeah.
into that. Sell us,
Oh, yeah.
and
I won't
share
give
with
too
us
much
why
away,
it.
but I'll give a couple examples because the things
Right.
I'm pretty fired up about. This was so
Yeah.
here's the
Narrative reflections on
yeah,
the
narrative reflections
apostles'
on the apostles.
final
Final
moments.
moments.
Wow.
And
Okay.
then this Steve Ray, who's beloved in, a lot of Catholic circles. I was blessed to go on a Holy Land pilgrimage with him many years ago,
Wow. Yeah.
and I've told him this. He's well aware of this. I've shown his footprints of God. Some of them, not I get through maybe
Hmm.
like two or three of them. I'll use them, to this day through some of my freshman classes, and
Nice.
it's so funny because he's, his sense of humor. It's real dad humor kind of. You know what I mean? Like he's got that kind of that vibe, and so
Hmm.
sometimes it's like deliberately a little cringy, like in a fun way. Like he'll make these jokes, and they're like, "Oh my goodness." But they get to see the biblical lands, and it's
Hmm.
just a really fun adventure, sort of. And I even had some students raise money to to get a Steve Ray cardboard cutout on the back door of my classroom, like life size. It's crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
So Steve, I sent him a copy of this, and he was so generous. He wrote a review, just a short little snippet for it, and I asked him.
Hmm.
I said, Steve, I said, can I please use that for the book description? He's like, yeah, sure. So this is what Steve wrote. He said, after Pentecost, the New Testament tells us very little about Jesus's apostles. Where did they live? Where did they preach? What adventures did they have, and how did they die? Gleaning from various historical accounts and traditions, Mike Creavey uses his own fertile imagination to fill in the gaps. These entertaining stories of the apostles are spiritually rich, easy to read, and devotionally substantial. And that was just so touching, and it really capped off like what I wanted from it. I mean, I basically I wrote I wrote scenes that basically I saw, or that I would like to see, that helped me sort of meditate more deeply on the apostles,
Hmm.
but in a way I hadn't seen anywhere else before.
Yeah.
And this is also like pre-Chosen, like this before the Chosen came out, um,
Gotcha. Okay.
which I'm kind of glad, because I feel like if I had written it later, some of the actors or some of those scenes might have played in a little too much to my own, mentality of it.
So why
So
does it matter for you for these final
yeah,
moments to go all Ignatian on this stuff, and or
yeah.
imaginative, and get into these moments?
I think for me, it's kind of personal in terms of, as I'm just reading. I love Chesterton. We have a GK Chesterton Society chapter around here, and
Mhm.
I saw a quote from him recently where he was saying something to the effect of the challenge of uh, not being sufficiently Catholic enough to be Catholic.
Mm.
Like this idea of like, we're all kind of on a spectrum. I'm baptized. I'm in the family, so to speak, but that doesn't mean that I'm done. And I can, to a greater or lesser degree, receive the grace God's trying to give me.
Mhm.
I can fall away from my witness to Him. And thinking about that, thinking about Judas, for example, here, I mean, you can't get closer, right, to the Lord. Like he's in the inner circle,
Mhm.
and he falls away.
Mhm.
And that's just always blown my mind. Where it's like, especially for my friends. I have a lot of non-Catholic family and friends, but I think even as a kid, just something about that kind of once saved, always saved thing
Mm.
just obviously never made sense to me. And I'm
Mhm.
looking at Judas, or I'm looking at Peter falling away, or all of them not,
Mhm.
going to where they were supposed to be.
Mhm.
In fact, in the Thomas chapter, I just remembered in the Thomas chapter, and they're all pretty short. They're maybe 5-10 minutes per chapter. Uh, that really kind of puts you with him in the aftermath. Because my question with Thomas was, where was he when they all saw Jesus and he wasn't with them? you know? And I was like, that's an interesting question.
By the way, do you
And
have a sense of where he was? Or
well,
we
that's
have
what
no
popped.
idea?
Well, I've never seen anything. It just popped in
Okay.
my head. It's like later, like they're telling him Thomas, who wasn't with them, and they're telling him, and he doesn't believe them, and then Jesus, comes later. What I decided to do with it was, what if he was like doing his own little Via Dolorosa in guilt after the fact?
Mm.
So he's like, so basically, it picks up with him kind of just completely destroyed and heartbroken, and he's walking around,
Mhm.
just it's not quite. He doesn't know
Mhm.
what to do, and he goes to Calvary and he sees the
Wow.
aftermath of it, and it was just like the idea of like he's on the right track, but he was supposed to be there a few days ago, you know,
Right, right.
but Christ's going to work with him, and so yeah, for me, I think that there's a lot of me in it, when I read
Mhm.
through it and I see like connecting with particular faults or particular worries about am I where I should be right now? Like
Mhm.
if I were put on the spot right now, what would I do? Because I totally get how you could back out of it, you know, for
Yeah.
fear.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's some of it, I think.
Why and so you're also now doing this for the Old Testament as
Hmm.
well. And as you mentioned, you don't have the figure of Christ to be such an
Yeah,
overt touch point. So how are you handling that? I mean, there's a lot
yeah,
more varied angelic activity and a lot more visionary stuff going
yeah.
on. So that must be more imaginative.
It is, but what's funny is I haven't touched on any of that, at
I
least not
see.
yet. So for
Okay.
me, it's like I'll tell you. Let me tell you the one that it's not really a giveaway because I haven't figured it out yet. I keep like trashing the chapters
Yeah.
or the drafts of it because it's just not right yet. And what hit me was this is like 2 years ago. When I first really started sketching out like who do I want to focus on, and they're
Mm.
not all the most obvious ones you'd expect. Some I'd say half of them are ones you'd expect. Others are a little like oh okay. Um, and one of them is uh, David
Mhm.
awaiting news on the whole Absalom situation.
Mm.
And he's waiting back at the city. His son is rebelling against him. His son is completely unrepentant. Like there
Mhm.
is no Absalom's not gonna repent. Absalom's not gonna be the prodigal son who comes home. He wants to kill his father, and he's gonna do it if he gets the chance. And it's like,
Mhm.
how could that happen? Well, people have free will, and it's this just. I mean, and so I'm thinking of that story, and I'm thinking in a general way, a couple
Mhm.
years ago, of like the parents whose kids wander from the faith,
Mhm.
or the parent who got like, I try to do all the right things, and you're just up against like, I can't fix this. Like this is beyond me, and I
Mhm.
still have authority. I still have spiritual authority. I'm still praying, and God's going to take that into account, but I can't make this person do anything. And I wish I
Yeah.
could, make them do
Yeah.
the right thing. And what happened was funny enough is like, I wrote the scene where basically they bring back news that Absalom is dead and that they've basically killed him and they've ended the rebellion and David's inconsolable.
Mhm.
Um, even though they've won, he's lost his son, and it's just this heartbreaking thing. Then I
Mhm.
had a son, and I have two girls, and so not to knock that at all, but there's just something different in the moment that like I sat down to try to write that a little bit with having like a
Mhm.
newborn son. Something just like I couldn't do it, and then I
Really?
drafted a few versions of it, and I was like, it's just nah, it's just not there yet. And I think I know it will be. I have faith that I'll get it there,
Mhm.
but just think, I was talking to Thomas. Again, I keep bringing up Thomas Salerno. I have to do it.
Yeah.
We were having a chat about this after one of our recent interviews we were doing, and I said, it's just amazing this idea, like the level of love in a father who, like, you would rather be killed
Mhm.
like by your rebellious son than see any harm come to him, like legit.
Mhm.
In fact, I'm holding my funny enough, my first order mug here. I'm thinking of Kylo Ren. People like, oh, they killed off
Yeah.
Han. Yeah, but when Kylo stabs Han, if you haven't seen it, where have you been for the last 9 years,
Mhm.
whatever? When he stabs Han, and that last thing that Han does is just touch his face. Like, you have killed me. Like
Mhm.
it's the oh gosh, like that just absolutely rips me up. And
Mhm.
that idea, and so long story short, I think what I'm getting at with it is the Old Testament so far, the chapters, like, they're kind of self-contained,
Mhm.
but I feel like there's opportunity with all of them to demonstrate things like, in that case, like the limitless love of the Father for the Son kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, the in a human way, the willingness to by the power of grace, right? To try to resist the temptation to grudges, or to, because if somebody wrongs me, it's not that difficult for me to hold a grudge,
Mhm.
or if it is someone very close, you can feel that real personal affront, but to access that truly agape love,
Mhm.
so I see things like that as like precursors, especially with someone like David, who messed up so much and who failed so much. But here you have like a real
Mhm.
kind of tapping into that limitless kind of love that he's always meant to be tapping into,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
um, if that makes sense. Yeah. So there's
Totally.
one
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
No, that's good stuff. Actually, your reference to Kylo Ren just made me realize something I hadn't considered about that first, what is it, Force Awakens versus
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the end of the Luke cycle, where
Yeah.
he stands down from executing his father.
Right.
And it's just so interesting. I could imagine the film directors going, "Well, hey, what would happen to a sort of Force character if he does? What if
Yeah.
Luke did kill his father?" And so then
Yeah.
that becomes Kylo's storyline. I've not thought of that new trilogy in light of that. Whatever our complaints may be
Well,
about it, but
and to be
that's
fair, like
compelling.
because I've got plenty of criticisms for the new trilogy, but I remember when I was first watching The Last Jedi, and
Mhm,
they hint this whole thing like, oh, maybe he's going to come around, and like, oh, look, Ray and him are fighting, and the whole like, oh, this is really awesome. And the moment like they win the fight, and she's like, oh, let's go help the good guys, and he's standing there staring at the throne. I'm
mhm,
sitting in the theater like, oh no, oh no, 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 no. I'm just like, yeah, he doesn't want to help the good guys. Like he just used you to take out these other dudes because he can't do that alone. And now he's like,
mhm,
okay, now the throne's mine. I'm like, oh, see, that's like Absalom. It's like,
mhm,
say what you will, but like, no, I really, you know,
mhm.
part of me does think they should just, I love his redemption. I mean, we always like redemption, but sometimes it's forced. And sometimes I do wonder, like, what if they had just let it go the whole way through, man? It's a heartbreak thing, but some people don't want it.
Mhm. Yeah,
they
well,
they
there could have
don't
been a
want the
different story there. Yeah,
yeah.
you're oh gosh, you're so big Star Wars fan, I'm guessing. I think there's
Yes.
a Death Star to your left, the
There
purple.
is. There's a little
Okay,
bit of a glare on it because of the window, but it's back
okay.
there. Yeah.
No, that's fun. So let's talk for a minute about
Yeah.
well, we're getting there. So let's talk about imagination
Yeah.
in a second. I want to ask you. You
Sure.
said something very cool. So we legend fiction is a writing community,
Yeah.
and uh, striving to be these faith inspired authors. So it's not so much about how do we write altar calls in really compelling ways, using
Right. Right.
orcs and elves and stuff. It's like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
How do you actually tell really good stories that might that might evangelize through imagination? Now, I
Hmm.
say that with the caveat that I dislike weaponizing anything for the sake of evangelization. I think
Yeah.
that fiction it's a thing that you do that has its own is its own vocation. It exists for its own purpose. It has a very valuable and specific and spiritual role that it plays,
Yeah.
and it's very important to learn to get that right. Stuff like that. So when you mentioned earlier that there's, like you said with Tolkien, there's times where your things just seem to apparate with
Hmm.
such clarity that all you're doing is writing them down. I've experienced this, and so you just said that you did too. I'm just curious, what do you think is going on, and
Yeah.
how do you make sense of that?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think um, this might be a bit of a stretch. Let me grab. I have this little notebook here. This just came to mind. I didn't plan it ahead of time. Oh, it's right here. There is so my one thing I'm really just as a teacher. I'm increasingly interested in and kind of drawn into the kind of classical education revival.
Mhm,
And in some of my research, I've been looking at over the years different texts and different expressions of what it is, and what are we trying to get at with this idea of teaching in this Catholic liberal arts kind of way. And this was from, I loved it, I wrote it down. Someone can look it up. I don't know where. I think it's out west somewhere. I want to say like Montana or one of the Dakotas or something. There's a school called Rolling Acres School. I don't think it's a Catholic school
okay.
specifically, but this is really neat. So this was part of their mission statement, and I promise I think it relates. It says Christianity associates this principle of order with Christ, the Logos in John's Gospel. The unifying principle of this, and it's talking about classical education approach, is then Christ himself, the divine orderer, whom we find singing to us in the harmony of all things. And
Mm,
I love that That
It's
phrase, it
beautiful.
stuck with me. And I think that but I think that's in story. I think that's what's going on too. The idea
Hmm.
of, in fact, I want to say there was an interview I heard about this, but I haven't been able to source it because not everything's on YouTube. I think most of it is now, but there was an interview I heard referenced many years ago in the
Okay.
wake of the release of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, where in part of the whole PR circuit and everything, somebody asked Viggo Mortensen like, why do people love these stories so much?
Hmm.
And evidently, he just very matter of factly said, because they're true.
Hmm.
And I just felt, and he went on to explain, and I was just like, yes, that's this idea of like, that doesn't mean that they're factually oh, this happened in this year in this place. No, but it's tapping into true things,
Hmm.
that things like heroism, things like sacrifice, things like faith,
Hmm.
fellowship. Um, and I just like this again. This is something I've talked to a lot of friends about, where sometimes I can't put my finger on it, but I just know it just doesn't. At least for me, it doesn't work. It just
Hmm.
doesn't ring true. And other
Hmm.
times, it just totally hits it out of the park. And I don't want to name specific films in a negative way because I don't want to denigrate any, but I think we've all seen things. I'm thinking of a few specifics now without mentioning them, where it's like a Christian film or a
Yeah.
Christian book,
Hmm.
and like God bless them. Like I want to support them, I want to encourage them, but it's just like you know you're
It's not a
following a
good story.
story. No,
Yeah.
like you're following a story, and then all of a sudden, out of like nowhere, organic to the story, the character, they might as well just turn to the camera and go, because Jesus died for our sins. And you're like, don't,
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
do that. And
Yeah.
it's just, oh, there's a particular, very, very famous, 80s, 90s child star who now does a lot of Christian movies. We'd know him if I said his name. I love him dearly, but a lot of his movies, I think, sometimes end up going that road. And they're,
Okay. I haven't seen
but
enough to be able to say. I mean, we grew up watching a couple of
yeah,
them, and they were egregious, like as you say. But so what you're getting at here then is that beautiful line is like, what is I'm going to butcher it. The presence of Christ, singing through the harmony of
singing, yeah, the harmony of all
creation,
things.
harmony of
Yeah,
all things. Um, Beautiful. What is your then? Uh, how would you then talk, or maybe how do you talk about what imagination is and why it's
yeah,
valuable, and how it sort of relates to storytelling and fiction, and
yeah.
then how are you making sense of this amazing part of us?
It's funny. This is what I was asking my wife this morning. Like
Mm,
I like cornered her early in the morning with this question. She was more awake than usual when I do this, because normally I'll bring up like things like this, and she's like, "Why are you doing this to me before I've had coffee?" But I said, I was like, "I'm sorry. I'm just always thinking." But I asked her basically because she's a big Harry Potter fan, and I was a little bit ahead of that. I mean, like my younger brothers read those like when they were first coming out, and then the movies started
mhm.
coming out when I was in high school and college.
Yeah.
So I followed those, and I later read the books, just to do it, and really enjoyed it. But for her, it's like she grew up with this, and it was this fandom and all these kinds of things. But I just
Mhm.
asked her point blank this morning. I said, why do you love those stories, or what was it? I think I made it past tense. Like
Mm.
what made you love those?
Mhm.
And it was neat. And she's like, well, she says it was the community. It was something I shared with my friends. And as
Mhm.
she's going down the list, I'm thinking like, at least in film, for me, it's the same thing with Star Wars. It's like this ubiquitous, like I'm growing up and my buddies like it too.
Yeah.
And we don't just like it, but like we start participating in it, right? Through play,
Mhm.
through, so now I am Luke Skywalker or you're Darth Vader. And like you have those arguments, right? Or if you had older brothers, like, or older cousins, they got all the cool toys and you got the less cool ones. If you were older
Mhm.
like I was, you got to pick,
Mhm.
who got to be who. I was always Batman, my brother was always Robin, like these
Oh, that's
kinds of
funny.
things.
Yeah. Batman's
And
my favorite.
is that, yeah, and
Yeah.
what's funny though, it's sort of it's a Jerry Seinfeld joke, but I think there's some truth to it when he's explaining to his audience in one bit I heard years ago. He says, it was young boys growing up with like superheroes and stuff. He goes like Batman and Superman and Spider-Man. He goes, these are not fantasies. These are options. He's like like a
Mm.
4 or 5 year old boy is like, I'm gonna be, Spider-Man. And I don't know that
That's
that's
great.
entirely true, but if it's a sense of some kind of internal investment, I think
Mhm.
even from the earliest age for me, it wasn't just entertainment.
Nope.
There was some kind of like I would make play sets and costumes and stuff. Like we'd make Ninja Turtle stuff,
Mhm.
before Amazon, right? Just click, no, like kids, make your own stuff.
Yep.
It's part of the process. Um, and I think for me, I think that again, imagination, like this image making. Well, what am I doing? I think I'm participating in my own way, in a tiny fraction of a way with what it must be like for God to create.
Mhm.
And I think that's why Tolkien's dead on with the whole subcreation thing.
Mhm.
Um, that God has this in his case, of course, this perfect conceptualization of something other than himself that he wants to make real. Which I mean, even that, like, how
Mm.
like he doesn't need anything. He goes, you know what, duckbill platypus would be pretty cool, and then it's real. Like what? Like how
Yeah.
does that even So in a much lesser extent, like all right, well I'm an awkward kid, or even if I'm not that awkward, I'm a kid. I face things in my 5-year-old, 6-year-old life that are vulnerabilities. Like I get
Mhm.
sick, or someone's picking on me at school, or whatever. But then I read this story, or I watch this thing, and I see someone else who's
Mhm.
going through something hard, but they
Mhm.
they do something about it, or they find a way, or they find the
Yeah.
team that they need to be part of to work through it.
Mhm.
And I didn't like go to school dressed as Batman to take on, like
Oh,
I wasn't
I
going to do
did. I
that.
mean, I went to the
And that's what
playground dressed
I
as
think basically yeah, exactly. But it's like, you hope that, at least in some way, I think through these experiences, maybe
Mhm.
meditate more deeply, or at least it creates space for conversation,
So what's so
yeah.
interesting about that, and the fact that you asked your wife that question, I'm thinking as well, like, my family, we did not grow up with Star Wars and Harry Potter, so I'm a
Hmm.
late convert.
Yeah.
And um, it's funny now, just the limited sort of involvement that I've had, not so much with the Star Wars community, but just with the mythos and the lore. And then there's a
Yeah.
couple of videos on YouTube that'll show up, and the nostalgia that hits home from some of those John Williams scores. I'm like, this place
Oh
doesn't
my
even
gosh.
exist, and I'm yearning for it from this place
Yeah.
of my childhood. But then the same thing with Hogwarts and Harry Potter. And here's something. Okay, I'm just curious to see where this thought
Yeah.
goes and
Yeah.
where your mind goes
Sure.
with
Yeah.
this. There's
Please.
I'm fascinated by how Harry Potter, Hogwarts and such, has defined a generation of imagination,
Yeah.
in many ways. And I think in some very, very good ways, and we can argue about some bad ways. Whatever, let's put aside the bad stuff. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend, and it was talking about this ancient spirituality of Britain, which emerges out of the deeps of time, and then it sort of flowers into very concrete and specific things. And then we can sort of argue, well, the two world wars sort of changed things, and Britain entered the modern world or helped create it or whatever. But there's
Yeah.
still a germ of something so uniquely. It's as if all of the nations are persons, right? There is a
Mm.
distinctly personal presence to what Britain is compared to India, compared to a
Yeah.
different state in America, right? And from a spiritual standpoint, one would go, well, obviously, that's how would you say, the embodying within people or within culture of the persona of the angel of that nation. That's what it feels
Yeah.
like
That's
to be this
interesting.
British angel.
Yeah.
And so
And they do
there's
exist. There's angels
there
for the
is that,
nations.
which
Yeah.
exactly. So, and of course, there's all of the other angels that support that angel that are part of that thing that
Right.
are distinct from how India communicates and expresses her
Yeah.
genius and charism of the Holy Spirit and so on. What I
Wow.
find so interesting then is when Harry Potter shows up in many ways, it not only sort of creates a sort of world where magic and enchantment is restored or possible, and we can find a way in our horribly materialist mindsets to re-engage or at least reimagine what a world like that could be like. And funnily enough, for it to feel more like home than the concrete jungles of however we live.
Yeah.
It's that right there that so intrigues me, how a story can feel more like home than life around you, which
Yeah.
you're told is absolutely real. So where I'm going with this is to now be an adult, and for things like the new Hogwarts Legacy game, and
Yeah.
the new series that are all coming out, or the series that have you know we're not just bonding around a shared community. There is a personality or an attitude. There is a way of relating to reality that these stories mediate to us, that we
Hmm.
intuit as so deeply true that we're willing to put up with the ridicule of our family, not just because it's fun, but because
Yeah.
there's something that we can't describe that we can maybe intuit. This is so beautiful that even if it weren't
Yeah.
real, I have to. What's that wager? Pascal wager thing.
The
It's
Pascal's way.
not
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have to embody this and incarnate this, you know.
You know, it's funny. I, I'm going to throw something out there that I think I can at least introduce, and then I'm going to go do homework later because this is just sort of hitting me now. Drawing from I love Peter Creavey, you know, the Catholic philosopher up at
Mm-hmm.
Boston College, who, by the way, he's not a professor emeritus. I was just looking on the website for Boston College the other day because I was
Oh, yeah.
curious. He's still like professor there, and he's got courses, and it says like professor, and gives his office
Wow.
hours and stuff. And I think he's 87 years old. He's been on faculty there since 1965. And there's like
Amazing.
no way anyone else at Boston College has been there that long. Anyway, but he said he had a really neat talk I heard years ago where he was talking about imagination. He's a huge
Okay.
Tolkien fan, huge Lewis fan. I didn't mention
Mm.
C.S. Lewis too, but you know, absolutely. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
you can't see it, but I have this little threefold kind of photo frame up here with Lewis and Chesterton and Tolkien all kind of yucking it
Oh,
up in
wow.
different pictures. It looks like they're together.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to be a fly on the wall with the three of them in heaven, you know.
Can you
But
imagine?
but what's so amazing is someone like Lewis. Try to do this a roundabout way. He, you know, lest anybody gets really mad at me, I know he wasn't English. He was from Ireland. Okay, you know, he had certain Northern Irish sensibilities, but you know, he's so associated with England, right? He
Mm-hmm.
spent most of his life there, and he very much
Right.
in that. You know, he sort of embraced that kind of
Mm-hmm.
I think you know cultural and imaginatory framework and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, of course, Tolkien, and then you know Chesterton. So I don't. I'm personally drawn. There's something about England, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to me. I have a lot of Irish and Scottish ancestry too. If you put those with the English, it's like 80% of my background. I
Okay.
swear it's in. I think it's in the blood. I
Mm.
think that's a thing. You know, I've heard
I won't
theories.
disagree. We can sidebar that.
There's some, yeah. So, but I wonder when it comes to the flavor, like you're kind of talking about like the flavor of the imagination. I wonder how much of it might have something to do with the land,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the landscape, the geography. Because what Kreeft mentioned in that talk years ago was he was talking about he was making an argument for a particular kind of intriguing conceptualization of beauty among island nations. And
Mm.
he was talking about, you know, Great Britain. He's talking about Japan. Like he was going down a list of specific ones, and he didn't go too far with it, but he was introducing that
Mm.
idea that perhaps it's a inescapable awareness of limit, you know, because like you go in any direction, you're going to hit the
Yeah,
sea. Like
that's
there's no
kind of
like you can't
interesting.
trick yourself into
Yeah.
thinking your land goes on forever. It hits the sea somewhere. There's some appreciation
Mm.
for this distinction, maybe.
Creating a very definite persona compared to the
Yeah,
continent where they shade into each other in some
right.
ways.
And that unique kind of you know
Mm.
flavor, you know the Shire kind of mentality, like writ large, right? This idea that you know here's this Shire, you know,
Yeah.
and I wonder, you know, you do have like some of those really awesome, you know, it's somewhat depressing but kind of like really intriguing, like Russian novels
Mhm.
that I wonder, like the vastness and the desolation of like Siberia or something like that. Like if you have, I wonder, like does some of that play into why
Mm.
Dostoevsky writes the way he does,
Yeah,
you know, and
that
so
makes
that would
sense.
be a really fascinating thing to
There's a
explore.
conversation on this same channel with her name is Sherry, and I can't remember her last name, but she and a gentleman named Nate Heil from Grail Country,
Mm,
another YouTube channel. Anyhow,
yeah.
they came on to talk about imagination, and specifically, she and I then had a follow up conversation about George MacDonald and
Mm,
his take on why imagination is not just a function of human living, but is actually an essential and a vital part for human living. And she makes a very just it's a thrilling point that really brings home what you're saying, that
yeah.
the imagination clothes or oh gosh, what's how does she say it? I'm going to get it all wrong. We look at the world around us because we use the world around us to clothe what we are trying to communicate with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the very specific things that we do see around us um, are the things that we ingest to be able to articulate what we're intuiting, the insights that we're getting in the imagination, that we're, you know, how we're
Yeah.
combining things. But then it also goes the other way, which is we're not just sort of ingesting passive stuff. That stuff is all alive and charged. And
Mm,
if David Bentley Hart's book is to be taken seriously, all things are full of gods, right? Or
mm.
whoever the ancient Greek who was. So we're not only
Was that
just
Hopkins
passively
line, right? Too, that you know the world is charged with the grandeur
charged
of
with
God,
the grandeur
or
of
charged with
God
the grandeur of
and
God. Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
glory
Yeah.
of God.
Glory of God.
So
Yeah.
the landscape itself is not a passive thing. It is filled with and made up of and held
Yeah.
together by a lot of angelic activity, if not even angelic things themselves in all
It's
of their
receiving its
gradations.
own being at all moments from God anyway. It's an
So
act
there's a
of creation.
co-participation thing happening
Yeah.
between us receiving communication that we perceive as landscape, and then
Right.
also using that to embody our language. So we're both sort of
Yeah.
inside out and outside in at the same time. We've completely lost that now. And I think that's why when we talk about Harry Potter coming back,
Yeah.
re liturgizing or turning reality back into a liturgy. It's
Yeah.
funny. I watched the first Harry Potter movie after being told it was, canonically satanic my whole life. And then I watched the first video and I thought, you
Yeah.
know what? This is a safer movie for me to share with my little kid than, say, Spider Man.
Well, a lot of, yeah, the newer, very agenda-driven stuff that's out there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
but even the sense that flexing the imagination to be able to re engage with an enchanted universe
Yes.
compared to, as much
Yeah.
as I love Spider Man, and I do,
Yeah.
the thing is, Spider Man, it's a different kind of story. I get it. It's got its own merits.
Yeah.
But when you compare the two together, one is a very thin view of how somebody engages with reality compared to at
Mm,
Harry Potter, which is this incarnational introduction or initiation into the wider majesty and mysticism
yeah.
of what reality is.
I think it's that kind of Hamlet connection that you hear quoted a lot, right? About, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of. And I always come back to that because, I think the world we're in, you're basically, you're being pressured all the time to believe that there's basically less.
Hmm.
It's what you see is what you get, or less.
Hmm.
Where did that rabbit come from that he pulled out of the hat? Like, it's basically, we go through life trying to hack like a magic show. Is almost like this postmodern kind of mentality. And
Hmm.
quite frankly, that's why I'm sure there's some good stuff out there. I don't want to knock it all, but like, I have no interest most of the time in reading
Hmm.
like kind of modern fiction. I just, it's,
Hmm.
I'm gonna read, what I love is I love the Ransom trilogy.
Ah,
And
yes. So
some people
C.S.
do
Lewis's
some,
space trilogy.
yeah,
Yeah.
and some people, aren't, a lot of people aren't aware of those. And to me,
Hmm.
it's like, this is just so much fun where he's
Yeah.
pulling together, this medieval cosmology,
Hmm.
um, with well, and of course, just basically putting Tolkien in the story because I mean,
Yeah.
Ransom's basically Tolkien. But yeah,
Wait, I never intuit. I never thought that. That's
I
so
read it
interesting.
somewhere where
Yeah.
he's a philologist. He's a World War I veteran. He's out on a walk when you first meet him, like, in sort of like going across the Midlands. Like, it's
That
totally
is
this
so
this kind of
interesting. I never
like.
considered that.
Well, and word on the
Yeah.
street is that I heard somewhere that Tolkien kind of also, because it was after the fact, because that book, those were in the late 30s and the 40s.
Mhm.
Tolkien supposedly, to some degree, I heard, based Treebeard off Lewis.
Oh, how
Like,
funny.
his manner of speaking apparently mimics a lot of
Okay.
the way that Lewis spoke, which I thought was kind of fun.
That's funny. Hey, have
So,
you ever heard of the book Planet Narnia?
yes, I just went through that about a year or so ago. Michael Ward,
Yes,
well,
that's right.
father, he's
Yeah.
a priest now. I guess, yeah, Father Ward. Yeah,
Oh wow, I didn't know. I only read it through
yeah,
once, and
yeah.
if I thought I loved Narnia before, that
That
absolutely
was, oh my gosh.
grounded it like in an amazing way.
That a similar, not nearly to the same depth of scholarly kind of work, but another great one is, just it came out a couple years ago. Oh my gosh, I'm losing the name. Deeper Heaven by Christiana Hale. She at least
Okay.
was. I don't know if she's still at the Logo School out in Idaho, but she wrote.
Yeah.
I can send you that link if you want it. But that's a sort of an unpacking of the Ransom trilogy and
Wow.
trying to show
Yeah.
like how it fits into that cosmology and what these different the El Dila like really are referring
Hmm.
to and stuff. It was pretty cool.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, look, we got to start wrapping up. So,
Yes.
where can folk
We can
find
go
you
for it.
online, Mike, to
Yeah.
learn more about you and stay
Yes.
abreast of your upcoming book whenever it does happen?
Sure. Yeah. So the website's a great place. It's just thegraciousguest.org. I'm sort of a sporadic blogger, but occasionally
Hmm.
I do put some writing posts up there. But it's a good splash page for all the YouTube interviews. A lot of faith and culture related stuff. Got a lot of exorcism and Shroud of Turin interviews on there, which are cool.
Hmm.
And then the audiobook I just released for Return of the Lord. Also, they can check that out on Audible. It should come up. I think it'll be in iTunes pretty soon too.
Nice. And
I
did
don't
you
have
record it
anything on the
yourself?
website. I did. Yeah, there's nothing on the website yet. I got to give it a special button on there. I haven't gotten around to it
Gotcha.
yet because it's
Okay.
testing season. But yeah, not. I didn't want to go full on too wild with trying the different voices. There's a little bit of difference with it, but I didn't want to bite off more than I could chew and get too into like over the top character acting or anything. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.